Mountain Blade 2 has 6 kingdoms to choose from, and within those 6 are a smattering of units that you'll be training from lowly recruit all the way to their tier 5 Giga goodness. In this video today, I'm rebooting an older series I did during the early access of Bannerlord and reviewing the entire unit tree of each respective kingdom. Today we'll be focusing on Khuzait. Now this is of course not a guide of min-maxing, but a means of giving you an idea of how well a specific kingdom's soldiers stack up against other soldiers of similar rank. I'll be assigning each unit a rating of low, mid, or high. This way you'll be able to get an idea for how well that unit performs compared to its peers based off of the use case. Perhaps the skills and weapons are all over the place, making it a low-grade unit, or maybe it has the best of the best across the board, making it that high-grade Charles. You can quickly navigate to any tier of soldier by using the chapters in both the timeline and the description. As always, guys, if you end up enjoying the content, please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Each one of those things helps out any content creator you watch in a huge way to aid in combating the dreaded YouTube algorithm. But let's get started here on the Khuzait Unit Guide for Mountain Blade 2 Bannerlord. So starting us off at tier 2, we have the Khuzait Footman. I'm going in reverse. Usually I'd go with the Tribal Warrior from left to right, but I want to start with the Footman first. And the Footman's interesting because it does have your 40 athletics, your 40 one-handed, and your 40 polearm. But it does not have a polearm, which is actually very unfortunate. And if I were to compare this to a lot of the other characters, especially looking at its armor, it actually has very miserable armor, which is unfortunate because this kind of puts the Khuzait Footman in a really weird spot. It makes it so that the Clan Warrior obviously is better. The Clan Warrior we've given a high rating to before. The Infantryman has still a decent rating because of good armor. Doesn't have a polearm. Sturgian Warrior doesn't have a polearm and has terrible armor, so it's kind of right on line with the Footman. Now, where this kind of gets weird is the Azrai Footman is again another really high tier 1. The Volandian Footman, which I haven't looked at here on this list. Volandian Footman, there we go, is good because it has a polearm, but again, not the most amazing armor. Now, I'm actually going to be giving the Khuzait Footman a mid rank. Before it was a low rank, before we did this guide, and it would for all intents and purposes be a low rank again if it wasn't for the step light mace. Now why the step light mace is important is that it's on 2 of the 3 sets, so you do have a very good chance of getting a lot of soldiers with the mace. And on top of it, what you really want to use the Khuzait Footman for, outside of obviously progressing them down the whole right side of this tree, is they're very, very good if you're doing a purely Khuzait playthrough and you're trying to do the manual labors and bandit base. If what you do is you go and do the bandit base and you capture all those prisoners, then you go turn them in for the manual labors quest. It's called the Flesson Special, named after good old Flesson19. Please go and check his YouTube channel out because it has amazing, amazing Bannerlord content. But the Khuzait Footman is a really great way to just kind of do that with a low expense unit. So it actually gives you a ton of utility, especially in the early game, that I just cannot pass up. Giving these guys a mid ranking solely because of that. If I'm looking objectively at their skills, at their armament, at their armor, it's terrible. It's definitely a low. It's a lowest of the low next to the Sturgian Warrior. But I'm sorry, is it the Warrior? Yeah, it's the Sturgian Warrior. The thing is that you can just do so much with that mace and get so many prisoners that it just makes them so much more useful. Moving into the Tribal Warrior, I'm just going to be giving these guys a high because they have a lot of really great flexibility. They've got 40 bow, 40 riding, 40 one-handed, 20 polearm, which is alright because I'm not really trying to use them as a polearm. What's nice about Khuzait when you're starting out with these guys at tier 2 is that you can just get a ton of massed fire on with the Tribal Warriors. They don't have the best bows, they don't have the most amazing arrows. Actually, those are pretty good arrows for tier 2, to be totally honest. But they progress so well and so easily into Khuzait Raiders and Horsemen because they can stay at ranged. They can actually get close to people because of their horses, which means they're way more flexible, obviously, than other tier 2 archers at this stage. No one else has a tier 2 mounted archer like this to compare. So it allows you to push into this left side of the tree a lot easier than the right side, or any other archer for that matter, just because of the fact that they are going to be able to get so much experience being horse archers, which are already very strong in this game. So to recap, a high rating for the Khuzait Tribal Warrior and a mid rating for the Khuzait Footman. Into tier 3, we have the Khuzait Raider, and a real amazing, nice opening horse archer that progresses from the tribal warrior. Nice thing here is you get 2 stacks of step arrows, a long saber, and a simple short bow, which actually has an amazing amount of pierce, or just damage in general. It's a tier 3 bow, 56 pierce damage. It's really good. Now, the interesting thing about the Khuzait Raider, and I think this is the intention that Tailworlds had, was to kind of maybe push you to the Raider over the Hunter, the tier 3 archer. They have very comparable stats. Taking a look at this guy, he's got 70 bow, 70 riding, 70 one-handed, versus swapping that riding for athletics on the Hunter. The difference is the Hunter is, for all intents and purposes, the exact same character with 1 less stack of arrows, which actually acts as a detriment to the Hunter's ranking, which we'll get to in a little bit. But with no comparable other mounted horse archer, especially at tier 3, the Khuzait Raider absolutely has a high ranking. Even the other archers, which we'll talk about with the Hunter, don't have as good of a bow, and having 2 stacks of step arrows, which have 2 pierce damage and 24 each, that's going to give them a nice good 48 stack on an unmodified character. What I mean by unmodified is there's no captains that would boost this amount of arrows in the quiver, anything like that. So this is a really solid character or unit with a really good amount of armor too, for being a just simple horse archer and with a good horse. So definitely giving them a high ranking. Moving into our Khuzait Horsemen, we have another really strong unit here at rank 3. And to be perfectly fair, maybe honest here, honest, to be perfectly honest, I love the Khuzait setup of military, where you go from a tier 1 into 2 different tier 2s that then branch into 2 respective branches for each one. I think it's a nice, very standardized type of military that I think more kingdoms should mimic in their troop trees, just because it creates a nice, very what's the word? Not lateral, but it creates a very easy progression point. You're not kind of going down one, then all of a sudden it jumps onto a mounted unit at the very end, like you get with Britannia or even portions of the Imperial army list. So I really, really like Khuzait as a whole. So it's just kind of worth mentioning that point. So looking at the Khuzait Horsemen, we get 70 riding, 70 one-handed, 70 polearm. For all intents and purposes too, that those stats aren't anything crazy. For every other rider, we pretty much get that exact same stat amount. The Volandian Light Cav gets a little bit more polearm. They get 80 polearm. And looking at the Asarai Mamluk, I believe that they get a little bit more. Here, actually, Mamluk regular. We'll take a look at them by comparison. They get a little bit more. Oh, no, they don't. They have 70-70 as well. And the Light Cav, just to kind of bring them up here. For a counterpoint, they have 80 polearm with 60 riding and 70 one-handed. But what I really like here is the Khuzait Horseman has amazing armor compared to the other two. Has way better armor across all armor pierce pieces, and a really good horse, a good helmet, a good lance, not an amazing lance. It is braceable, which is nice, but you're not going to use bracing because you're on a horseback. Couchable is what's useful on horseback. But they have a really good shield, and sabers are amazing on horseback because they've got great length, great handling, and good damage. So this guy's got a tier 4 sword coming out the gate, retaining the high rank that he had in the previous unit ranking of this, and making him definitely stronger than the regular, because the regular has weird stats, right? It's got 70 skill in throwing, that's just been wasted, and putting them above the Volandian Light Cav, which is kind of a funky spot to begin with. So Khuzait Raider and Horseman both have their high ranking, so let's move into the Hunter now to see something that has dropped in ranking a little bit, because the Khuzait Hunter is a really solid archer. It's got 70 bow, 70 athletics, and 70 one-handed. But if I compare this to just simply the Sturgian archer or hunter, we get the same kind of stats almost, with 10 more bow into from one-handed for this character. We get a bow that is worse than the Khuzait Hunter. Khuzait Hunter has this simple short bow, which is a weapon tier 3. He has the best bow of any on-foot archer. But he only gets 1 stack of step arrows. If he had 2 stacks of step arrows, I think I would put the Khuzait Hunter back at high. But every other archer, the Asarai Light Archer here, for example, has 2 stacks of arrows. So everyone that is trying to actually be an archer has lots of arrows. The trained archer here has 1 stack, but he's already in a low position anyway. So the Khuzait Hunter here, I think because he cannot utilize his role at being an archer as well as even the Khuzait Raider or other archers in his category, I have to move him from high into mid because he still has a bow that does the most damage and a good amount of armor and a great weapon. I just think that he without that skill difference or a bunch of other things, having just that single stack is a detriment to him. So a mid rank for our Khuzait Hunter. Now for our Khuzait Spearman, he is up there with that Sturgian, not the Sturgian, I think it's Sturgian Soldier. Yeah, the Soldier. Soldier's got great armor, great skill set. Overall, probably the best tier 3 soldier amongst the boys in the band. And you get a very similar character here. You get a 70 athletics, 70 one-handed, 70 polearm character that's going to have a great braceable weighted step spear, so they can actually brace that against enemy cavalry, a wicker shield which is huge, so it actually allows them to absorb a lot of range fire, a good long saber, which they can actually have on both situations. I know a lot of people say that they don't like sabers on their infantry. I personally love them. For whatever reason, whenever I simulate infantry on infantry battles, it always seems to be units with swords outclassing units with maces or axes because of their reach. It seems to be the biggest factor when it comes to the AI in its current iteration. This, of course, could change. It probably will. But they've got really good armor across every piece. They pretty much outclass a lot of other infantry soldiers, especially ones that have really kind of mixed up stats or ones that have maybe not pole arms or whatever it is. So I would give the Khuzait Spearman a high rating yet again, retaining that former rank. So to recap here, we have Khuzait Raider at high, Horseman at high, Hunter at mid, dropping 1 point, and the Khuzait Spearman at high as well. So Khuzait is already off to a really good start, having a really good, nice, polished tier 2 and tier 3, moving up a little bit with the Footman as well as its overall kind of usability. So let's move in now to tier 4. With tier 4, we start to get into some spicier stuff. Starting with the Khuzait Horse Archer, we get a really strong archer. Looking at the stats, we have 100, 100, 100 across the board with bow, riding, and one-handed. And we have a really nice bow, too, with the heavy recurve bow, and 2 stacks of step arrows with 2 damage, 24 stack amount. Really nice. And just a devastating amount of armor here, right? Brigandine vest with 34 body armor, which is really good. Good, decent enough armor in the other positions. A nice shoulder armor and a good headpiece. Now, one thing to look at with the mount for horse archers, while speed is a factor, you want maneuverability because you are going to be turning with the horse archer, not running in a dead sprint trying to get charge damage. So having high maneuverability on the mount is very good and very crucial, and you get a mount with a lot of armor on it. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 great things. So all those things being said, we can compare the Khuzait Horse Archer to the Aserai Mamluk Cav. Now, the Mamluk Cav and Heavy Cav are 2 really amazing, really strong units. But to look at them as a pure horse archer, I think would be erroneous because they do have a lot of bow, riding, and one-handed, 100, 110, and 100, so a little bit more than our horse archer. But you can see that they also have only 1 stack of piercing arrows. And those piercing arrows are quite good. And the same exact recurve bow of the Aserai, of the Khuzait Archer we just took a look at, right? We're taking a look at that heavy recurve bow on both. But we lose a stack with the piercing arrows in exchange for a sword and shield, because that Mamluk Cav is supposed to be a bit of a hybrid horse archer melee cav counterpart, because that's kind of where it fits the role of the Aserai military. So to compare them on a 1-to-1 as a purely horse archer, I feel like the Khuzait Horse Archer still wins in this regard, and I'm going to be giving it a high rating because the horse also has a higher maneuverability than the Nahasawi. This is a regular mount versus the war mount of the other. And this, of course, has higher armor on it, so it will be a little bit slower on the draw. This is a lighter armor piece. So the Horse Archer, again, definitely maintaining that high ranking because we want it to just simply pour arrows downfield, and it does that really well, especially with a lot of survivability on the Brigandine vests. Moving into our Khuzait Lancer, we get a very strong showing of the tier 4 pure cavalry unit here with 100 riding, 100 one-handed, 100 polearm. We get a long saber, which is, again, like I've mentioned, so strong. An Eastern Cavalry shield, which is going to be really nice too, really big shield, or big enough for on horseback, and a light step rider lance. We also are going to be looking at Lancer Lamellar armor, which is very good with some other adjoining pieces who are not as amazing. A good shoulder piece and a great helmet, and a very good mount. High maneuverability, high speed, high hit points, high charge damage. This is a strong ass mount for a tier 4 character here, a tier 4 unit. We can compare this to the Battanian Scout, which I've already said is just in a really weird, funky spot. Sure, it has a super long, good lance for cavalry on cavalry combat, and it is couchable, which is great. The Valandian cavalry, which does not have a couchable lance, which kind of again puts it in a weird spot, does have 120 riding with 110 polearm and 80 one-handed, which is good and bad because it kind of makes it kind of shoehorns this unit exclusively into being better on horseback than any other situation, versus if I'm in a siege, the Khuzait Lancer really can hold that line very well. And it's why I really like the Lancer over even the Cav, the Valandian Cav or the Battanian Scout, because I just get so much more use out of it in my opinion. So I'm going to be giving the Khuzait Lancer a high rating here. We don't get couchable in the Lance, which I think is an unfortunate setback, but everything else about the character is really strong, really well-rounded. It's going to be good in sieges as well as field battles, and it's going to be very durable in those field battles as well. Things that I really like about this character and our unit, and it just kind of it plays kind of back into the strengths of Khuzait, which is going to be their horses. I'm fine with this stuff being lower rating if this stuff is higher rating or at least comparable. The Khuzait Horse Archer used to not have 2 quivers, and now it does. At least I think it didn't before. But it's definitely pushed itself up in its ranking from mid into a high, from mid to high. Moving into our Khuzait Archer here, we have a return to form for the Archer. Because the Khuzait Hunter only had 1 stack, we now get 2 stacks of step arrows, putting us with 2 pierce damage and that heavy recurve bow that the Khuzait Horse Archer had. We have the same armor pretty much too as that character with the 34 body armor, Brigandine vest, some okay boots and gloves with a good enough shoulder piece. And that again can maybe change here. So the Horse Archer also too has 110 bow, 100 riding, which is a little funky, and 90 one-handed. So I think I'd really like to see 100 athletics and 60 riding. I've never seen a horse or a Khuzait Archer mount a horse. And typically the way the AI works is if it has skill in something in a given scenario, it will take advantage of that skill. But like I've said, I've never seen one of these characters mount a horse, so I find that riding is completely wasted, unfortunately. With that being said, though, we still have a character that has better bow than almost every other archer, a better bow, quite literally the actual bow, than almost every other archer, better arrows than almost every other archer as well, and very good defensive capabilities. The Astray Archer is a real Chad here, but still doesn't kind of get all the fun out of it. Because the Sturgian Archer, similar situation here, right? Nordic short bow, which has 52 damage, versus the 62 of the heavy recurve bow, and the Imperial Veteran Archer only has 1 stack of arrows, and they're barbed arrows. So I'm definitely going to be putting the Khuzait Archer at high, regardless of the fact that it has wasted 40 skill points in riding, because it still does better at what its job is: shooting arrows and staying alive. It's got a good survivability, it's got a lot of arrows that do damage, and a bow that does way more damage than the other archers. So definitely has that high moniker here. Moving into our Khuzait Spear Infantry, we have a character too that has great skill set with 100 athletics, riding and 100 athletics, one-handed and polearm, and we have a very good selection of armor and armament. Cured leather lamellar armor is 24,612 with your leather vambraces, your sturdy leather boots, your good shoulder pieces, and your good headpiece. One thing I like about Khuzait is they have very good shoulder pieces that they take advantage of, which is really nice to see on the units. A lot of other factions don't have good shoulder pieces, so that's kind of reflected in their regional choices for their armor. But comparing them to the Battanian Picked Warrior, they can't really hold a candle to these guys, because these guys have better skills, they've got better armament, really jacked armor here on these guys. Like, look at this thing, 31, 10, 13, it's really good. The Valandian Swordsman has better armor, but doesn't have a polearm, and it has wasted skill in the polearm. The Imperial Veteran Infantryman has really badass armor, right? But has wasted armament with the Pilum, which is not even a good throwing or a good one-handed polearm. It's just got no length to it. So you kind of get a weird situation there. The Asteroid Infantry is an amazing unit. The Sturgian Spearman we've already talked about is really strong as well, especially with its skills being so good as well. 100, 100, 100. Their skills aren't good. I lied. I don't remember what I was talking about with that guy. But either way, I think that the Khuzait Spearman falls into that mid ranking. Its spear is not amazing. It's got 138 length. It's not braceable. His armor is really good, but it's not, again, not amazing. It's not the best armor or the worst armor. They do have these sabers, which are really nice in combat, which I really do like. And I don't feel like any of their skills are wasted, like you get with, say, the Volandian Spearman, which has polearm without a polearm. So I definitely get them at a mid rank. If their spear was braceable, or if they had a longer spear, if they had better armor, they could push themselves to higher. But at that point, I think they still retain the mid rank that they had before. So to recap here, we have a high rank on the Horse Archer, a high rank on the Lancer, a high rank now on the Archer, and a mid rank here on the Spear Infantry. All right, we're on to the top tier, the tier 5 for Khuzait's army. And we're starting with the Khuzait Heavy Horse Archer, maintaining a very strong presence in that Horse Archer slot, which I would come to expect from Khuzait. Looking at them, we're going to still have a step recurve bow and step arrows, though. This is something that I think Khuzait suffers from in both the Horse Archer slot and the Marksman slot, and maybe it's Tailworld's decision to kind of go with a regional arrow choice with the step arrow, but I think it unfortunately kind of acts against them. They have an outstanding amount of armor though, right? The Brigandine armor has now been upgraded to the mirrored Brigandine armor, which has a little bit more body armor, but a substantial increase in both arm and leg armor over the Horse Archer and Khuzait counterparts. We get better shoulder piece armor and pretty damn good both glove and foot pieces with the same horse to step hunter and a great helmet. Also too, we have that fine steel saber, and we're looking at 130 across the board with bow, riding, and one-handed. Comparing this over to the Asteroid Mamluk Heavy Cav, we have 130, 130, 130. The same kind of setup here though, but with now piercing arrows, giving them a better arrow than our dedicated Horse Archer, and overall armor that is comparable, if not slightly better. Horse armor too, and horse that is better as well, with a much faster maneuverability and much better survivability on the mount. And then the Imperial Bucellarii, which is actually surprisingly has just slightly less damage on their arrows compared to the Khuzait Heavy Horse Archer, which I think is a little crappy. Same kind of bow and similar kind of survivability, not so amazing of a horse though. So I think, though, kind of taking a look at these three, the Khuzait Heavy Horse Archer, I'm putting at a high rank because, again, it does have better arrows than our Bucellarii, if a comparable bow, better survivability, and a better horse than our Bucellarii. Comparing it strictly to the Mamluk Heavy Cav, the Mamluk Heavy Cav is a better unit, but the Mamluk Heavy Cav has that kind of hybrid role still maintaining kind of a melee combatant within the cavalry sphere. So it only has a set of arrows, and that I think kind of curves its overall usability. It's like, I'll take more arrows that do less damage than less arrows that do slightly more damage, and that's, again, slightly more damage, only too much more pierce. So I definitely think that the Heavy Horse Archer is just barely in the high category, and I think that it's held back by the fact that it uses a step recurve bow and a step arrows in this position at tier 5, rather than just kind of upgrading those to something that is a true tier 5 worth. I think piercing arrows would make this an amazing archer, but maybe it's there for a balance reason, and I'm just kind of speaking as some arbitrary gamer here. Moving into our next unit, we have the Heavy Lancer, and it's a tank, man. Like, it's got such amazing armor, 46, 14, and 14 with the bronze lamellar over mail. Not as amazing boot and armor pieces, but really nice shoulder piece with more body armor and more arm armor onto that, with a beastly helmet and a really good mount with the Karahan, giving 77 maneuver, 60 speed, 235 hit points, and 20 charge damage, though not amazing by comparison to the other ones, but still very good. A couchable lance, which is huge, and 150 riding, 130 one-handed, 130 polearm. Comparing this to our Volandian Vanguard, we're going to be looking at 130 across the board. It is couchable. I thought it wasn't couchable. I'm thinking of the Horseman. The Horseman doesn't have a couchable lance. A smaller lance that is couchable. This is 184 length versus the 193, so just slightly less. But overall, armor is a little bit more durable and their horse is a little bit better here. So looking at the two, it's kind of a sticky situation here because that Volandian Vanguard we marked it as a mid before, but the Battanian Horseman has a braceable, not a couchable lance, and it just has an axe as well. I think this one's a sword. Yeah, steel fine steel cavalry broadsword. So that is something to kind of consider here, and the armor is comparable to the heavy lancer, except for this heavy lancer has much more on the body armor portion. So it's interesting because the horseman is a low rating, and the Vanguard, actually I think we did looking at have it on my right side, it is a low rating, yeah. And the Vanguard is a mid rating. So I couldn't really give the Heavy Lancer a high rating, even though it's got 20 more riding, which is very nice, has very good survivability, and it has a very good horse with very good armor on that horse. But I think that the Vanguard has a better horse with better armor on that horse, has comparable skills with 20 less riding, but more survivability across all of its armor pieces, and one set, which is very nice. It's locked into pretty much what you get here. Same thing here with the Heavy Lancer. So it's kind of like a tie for mid. So I don't think I could put it at a high rating because of that, because there's so many things that work against it that it does shore up. So I'd put that Heavy Lancer at a mid rank now. This is down from the high that it was before. And I think that it just kind of really comes down to the fact that the Vanguard got better, making that the Heavy Lancer kind of pushes down on its roll a little bit. Now, that's of course not to say it's a bad character. It's still a very, very strong unit. And as a pure cav unit, it's an amazing unit for Volandia. Don't sleep on them because I'm putting them at a mid. I'm just saying, comparing them to the Vanguard, who I've put at a mid, he's not above that character. Our next unit in the tier 5 list is the Khuzait Marksman. Now, with the Marksman, we have 130 bow, athletics, and one-handed. That's kind of a little weird. Well, not weird. It's just kind of a little not as competitive as some of the other archers here. Step recurve bow here, going to be at that 62 damage with these step arrows with 2 pierce, 2 nice stacks of them, which is lovely, of course. The armor, though, goes down with the cured leather lamellar armor by comparison to the Khuzait archer, which had that brigandine armor, right? But we get better armor pieces in both the hand and the foot section with a pretty solid shoulder and head piece. So there is that kind of thing to kind of distinguish between. And also the nice thing is, I think almost the entire tier 5 set or tier 5 range for Khuzait is just a one set unit, meaning that you don't get much variety, which can be a good and a bad thing depending on how you're looking at this. But I think it's kind of nice for just, again, a standardized military. Comparing this to the MSI Master Archer, though, we have 160 bow on these guys. We have the same bow, but we now have piercing arrows, so we get better archers. The MSI Master Archer, in my opinion, is the best non-noble unit archer in the game. It's very strong. With that 30 more bow, it shoots very quickly. It's a really strong unit. Into the Imperial Palatine Guard, we get bodkin arrows, which are better than step arrows, and we get a step war bow, which is better than the step recurve bow. And looking at this, we have 140 bow on this character as well, this unit as well, with a lot of survivability across all the armor pieces. So the Sturgian Veteran Bowman is a low rank with barbed arrows and a Nordic short bow. So it's definitely above the Sturgian Veteran Bowman, but it's not above the Master Archer, let alone the Palatine Guard. So we're putting the Khuzait Marksman at a mid rank, mainly because the Palatine Guard got better. The Master Archer's always been amazing. The Khuzait Marksman, though, I think it's still Tailward's way of saying, you have a good archer, but the heavy horse archer is where we want you to go for the theme of Khuzait. Maybe that's their kind of overall role, the way they're approaching it. So a mid rank here on the Khuzait Marksman, simply because we're dropping a little bit in armor here, and we still are stuck with the step arrows and a step recurve bow that we had now for 2 ranks. For 2 tiers. Moving into the last unit, we have the Khuzait Darkhand. Now in my infantry tier list video, comparing all the top tier infantry of the game, the Darkhand is like that really solid middle ground. It's got amazing armor, it's got really strong set of skills and armament, but it doesn't really absolutely excel at anything, but it doesn't suffer anything. There are things that are better than it, there are things that are way worse than it. And I think that that's a really good place for the infantry to be for what's these guys called? For Khuzait. You look at them, they're really solid here. We got 46, 14, 14 on the bronze lamellar. We've got a triangular throwing spear, which is not the best. It's not braceable. It doesn't have a good length. Eastern cav shield, which is nice, and a good heavy saber with one set, an amazing spiked helmet face mask, which they've had to begin with, and they lost, and they've gotten it back, which is just a really cool helmet. Their gloves are good. Their boots are okay. Not really good at all, actually. But we compare them to, say, the Imperial Legionnaire. The Imperial Legionnaire has just a ton of armor. A ton of armor. Doesn't have any throwing, unfortunately. It does lose that, but it has a shit pole arm. So it does kind of suffer there. The Heavy Spearman has got great skills, great armor, great everything. One of the best units in the, one of the best infantry soldiers in the game. The Veteran Infantry I've marked as that S tier because it's got great throwing, great one-handed, great skill set across the board with 160 one-handed skill here. So it's definitely not in that high category, but it's definitely not a low like a Sergeant or an Oathsworn. So I definitely think that the Dark Hand holds true to its mid rank, and I think that's an okay spot for the Dark Hand. I think it's okay for this to be a mid when the rest of the army hinges so much on Horse Archers, the Noble line, and to some lesser degree the Heavy Lancer, keeping you on that horseback for Khuzait. So to recap, we have that high ranking on the Horse Archer, that mid rank on the Khuzait Heavy Lancer, the mid rank on the Khuzait Marksman, and a mid rank on the Darkin. This is kind of interesting because this is swapped from mid to high, and this has gone from high to mid. But these two have stayed with their mid ranking of the previous ranking we've done before. Let's move over now to the Noble line. So the Noble line for Khuzait is spicy. You go from a pure Horse Archer into a hybrid Horse Archer around tier 4 that compares against the Mamluk, Heavy Cav, and whatnot. So we're going to go through that here right now, starting with our Noble Son. The Noble Son has a very interesting setup. 40 riding, 40 bow, 55 polearm with only 20 one-handed, and you have a step bow with step arrows. And it's kind of funky because if I'm comparing this to the Tribal Warrior, we have a step bow, we have step arrows, we have an iron saber, but now we have a jagged spear on the Tribal Warrior. It looks like these two have their armament mixed up because this has 40, 40, 40 in bow riding one-handed versus the 55 polearm we have on the Noble Son. And I'm going to be giving this character a mid because of that. I think that the Khuzait Noble Son just falls behind the usefulness if I'm just comparing them one-to-one, right? Obviously the trajectory of the Noble Son is far better, right? But if I'm comparing them, I've given this guy a high because he's got a lot of threat range and he can do a lot of stuff. But this guy can do this exact same stuff, but he doesn't get a polearm to take advantage of his polearm skill, and he doesn't get extra arrows to be a better Horse Archer. So I think unfortunately he drops into that mid rank by comparison to his bro. He doesn't even have better bow, he doesn't have better armor, anything like that. He has a pretty good horse with a step horse, but again, it's kind of worth looking at that on a one-to-one and solely looking at that tier 2. Again, like I've said before, the trajectory for the character is unit is way different by comparison to the Tribal Warrior. Now looking at the Chongli or Chonchli, we have a character that is now 70 bow, 70 riding, 70 polearm, and we now get a polearm, a weighted step spear with the step arrows and the simple short bow. Now unfortunately, starting at tier 3 all the way until tier 6, we will be seeing nothing but step arrows, which is quite unfortunate. And the Chonchli pretty much is an exact copy of the Khuzait Raider, and it just simply doesn't have an extra set of arrows. It just, that's what it loses. But it now becomes a hybrid unit more in line with the Mamluk. Now the Mamluk isn't at a comparison point here at tier 3. It becomes a comparison point at tier 4. The Mamluk regular does not have a bow and arrow. So the Chongli, I think if we're looking at a hybrid Horse Archer, it is a high rank because there's nothing else that really compares to it at tier 3. If I'm looking at it as a strictly a Horse Archer, it's kind of interesting because you have just the same thing as our Raider, just with less arrows, putting it at a mid-rank. So I think looking at it for what its role is supposed to be, what it eventually evolves into, I keep this guy at a high. Now, moving forward, we now have the Torgud. Now, the Torgud gets access to a glaive, thus changing this guy entirely. The glaive is probably one of the most devastating weapons in the game, or any just kind of swinging polearm on horseback is absolutely destructive. You have a lot of really good armor here at tier 4 with the cured leather lamellar armor, good arm armor, but decent so not good leg armor here, but a good horse with the step hunter and a good helmet and good shoulder piece. You now have the heavy recurve bow and step arrows in this character, so you have a lot to really take advantage of with a skill set of 100, 100, 100 across the board with 55 one-handed. This compares into our Asarai Mamluk Cav, which has a disgusting amount of armor and a very good mount with a very good amount of armor on that mount. But it's really not that great outside of being an archer by comparison to the Torgud. The glaive is just such a beater of worlds. It rips things up. This thing can just completely destroy other cavalry, but also infantry with that glaive. So I would rank this against the Asarai Mamluk as a high ranking. And I think just because we're looking at the hybrid horse archer nature of this character, it's just, they're so good. Now, from the Torgud, we go into the Keshig. I think Keshig's were the Khan's Guard, which is kind of funny that the Khan's Guard is after this. But these guys have a pretty good amount of armor. They kind of almost have less armor, right? By comparison, we have 24, 6, 12. Now this is 24, 2, 8 in both of it. But they do have better shoulder piece armor, better hand armor, and slightly better leg armor, foot armor. But they get a Karahan, which is a really good noble mount. They still have their glaive. They have the step recurve bow, the step arrows, and a straight saber, as well as a better helmet. This compares to the heavy cav, which has amazing armor, a step recurve bow as well, but now piercing arrows. Looking at the stat lines, looking at 130, 130, 130 on the heavy Mamluk, with 160, 130, 130. So if I'm looking at these guys as an archer, they are now 30 skill better, helping their reload speed and their damage. They're really devastating on horse now because of their glaive. I still think they've retained that high ranking because they're just so devastating. I think they do suffer a little bit of survivability because of that reinforced leather armor is not amazing at tier 5. I think that they deserve to have better armor. They shouldn't step down from tier 4 to tier 5. And this is kind of an issue I have with a lot of units in Terral World's kind of standard military progression, where you get units that lose tiers of armor or armament or arrows as they progress through their military. And that should not be that way. There are tons of mods that kind of balance and change these things, but it still kind of is a hindrance to the Keshig. Now, our last thing here is the Khan's Guard, which no one gets to compare to because there's no other tier 6 horse archer cav in the game. And they get 2 stacks of step arrows now, so they're even better at being archers. They get a step recurve bow. I thought they got a war bow. Doesn't one of these not have? Oh, this is a step war bow. That's right. So they are better. The Keshig has a better bow than the heavy Mamluk, which is worth noting. But the Khan's Guard loses that heavy bow and it goes back to a step recurve, but they still have a glaive here and 2 stacks, which is nice. They have 260 bow. The only thing that rivals that is the Fian. For comparison points, 260 bow on them. But they get stacked bodkin arrows with 3 damage on them, and their woodland longbow with 76 pierce versus the 66 pierce on the step recurve. But it's on horse, so who cares? And they get a disgusting amount of armor. A disgusting amount of armor across every single piece except for those boots. And they also get a Karahan mount with a good armor on that Karahan. They're definitely a high rank. The Khan's Guard is one of the best overall units in the game because of the way it can threaten. It's got an amazing amount of range capability with that 260 bow. The 220 pull-on keeps it very, very viable for smashing apart infantry, other archers, other horse archers. It's not going to be as great against other heavy cavalry units, of course, right? When you compare them to the Cataphract or even the Banner Knight. But still, when you put them in a one-on-one slog, it's going to be interesting because they now no longer have a one-handed weapon. And that kind of is a detriment when you're playing against any kind of siege battles and they've run out of arrows. In really close combat fights with other cavalry, it's really going to work against them. But the Khan's Guard is, again, more of a horse archer. So I definitely think that they retain that high ranking they've had for so long because they're still one of the best units in the game. So let's take a look at the overall army list and my thoughts. And as I've said before, the Khuzait military is one of my favorite militaries just for the breakout, for how it works, right? You don't get a unit that goes from being one specific style of unit and branching into another one at a weird, random tier. You go from a tribal warrior into either a dedicated horse archer or a dedicated cavalry soldier. You go from a footman into a dedicated archer or a dedicated infantry soldier. And I really like that progression point because I think for new players, it gives you a very clear, concise way to approach the military and what each thing's role is. When you look at stuff like the Aserai, when the Mamluk Cav, they are still a hybrid cav unit at the end of the day. It doesn't have 2 stacks of arrows. It has a lot of one-handed capabilities. When you take a look at the Sturgian noble line, it goes from a strong infantry soldier into a strong cavalry soldier that's actually better on foot than it is on horseback. So there are a lot of very confusing, non-contextual military choices across the game that I think Khuzait doesn't suffer from. Even their noble line, which is clearly a hybrid cavalry unit that can use its glaive to devastating effect, has a very high amount of punching power as just a straight up archer. And that I think is what I like about Khuzait so much. It's a very straightforward, very heavy hitting army. And you don't get the best archers and the best infantry out the gate. And I think that that's good. You get the best horse archers in the game across both the heavy horse archer and the Khan's Guard, rivaled very closely, I think, by the heavy Mamluk archer, but still a very strong showing for cavalry with this faction that is based and focused primarily on it. And I do like that the heavy lancer isn't the best cavalry shock troop, right? I like that the Cataphract or the Banner Knight are in stronger places than the heavy lancer, because then it kind of feels like if they had the best cavalry soldier, it would feel very funky playing the noble lines of both the Empire and the Volondia and being like, well, okay, well, what the hell's the point of this? I can have a tier 5 heavy lancer that's better than my tier 6 guy. So I like that there's a good progression for them. And I feel like Khuzait is the most balanced military, and not in just progression, but also the way you look at the other militaries by comparison, right? Like, okay, they don't have the best archers and the best infantry because other factions specialize in that. So I like that they kind of fit the world really well, and probably the best by comparison to the other ones. And nothing in their army feels completely lackluster. I don't feel like there's a choke point of survivability progressing from one tier to the next, like I get with Volondia, where I just go from high survivability to lower, and lower survivability. Or portions of Sturgia where I go from high to low to high survivability. So that's something I really like about Khuzait, and something I'd like to see reflected in more of the militaries of Mountain Blade 2 Bannerlord. So go ahead and let me know in the comment section below how you feel about the Khuzait military. Are you loving it? They've had so many balance changes to the AI, to their armor, to their skills, to their armament, to the way that the game actually computes cavalry, both horse archer and cavalry deaths and attacks in the actual auto-resolve portion of the game. So Khuzait has had so many passes since the early access portion of the game up until now. And they're in a very interesting point that I think they're probably the most balanced they've been, while also being still a very fun faction. I think that playing a whole faction of Khuzait heavy lancers, heavy horse archers, and Khan's Guard with you yourself being a kind of Khan's Guard replica is one of the most enjoyable ways to play Bannerlord, because you're just these riders of Rohan riding everything down. And it is so fun. So go ahead and let me know in the comment section below. Are you enjoying Khuzait? Have you not played Khuzait? Do you think that Khuzait actually has a real big problem with their infantry or their horse archers? Maybe I missed something entirely. As always, guys, let it be known, spread that information out. Make sure you're checking out all the other amazing YouTubers out there that are covering Bannerlord right now. Jackie Fish has just covered a lot of the mods that are coming out, especially Banner Kings, Flessin19, Lion Exodus. We have so many bros out there that are covering so much stuff. So make sure that you show them some love. Strat Gaming as well, all the bros out there. But as always, guys, thank you so much for watching here today. Our next one is going to be the Aserai to complete our unit guides, right? We've done everything else, yeah, because we just did Britannia, Aserai, and Khuzait were what was left. And you'll probably find that my Aserai guide is going to skew to high on almost everything in that tier 5 section, but that's okay. That's okay. But as always, guys, again, thank you so much for watching here today. Have a good one and take care.